That goes over there. This goes a little bit that way, back to here, and good. Okay. Looks like everything is in position and properly working. And we'll just give it another minute since it only just turned 12 o'clock before we start. For those that want to get a jump, we'll be looking at chapter 21 of the book of Vayikra, book of Leviticus, and this is Parashat Emor. But I know logging in can take a minute, so I'll give just another second before we dive in. Hope that everybody has been keeping up with the readings. As a reminder, we only get through a tiny slice of the Torah portion each year, and that means that there's much more to study on your own. It's always the trade-off. You can either skim everything very, very fast and do very little depth, or you can do everything with more depth, and it takes much longer. That is the trade-off. But certainly with a week to go for each Torah portion, there should be enough to do a little study each day and make it through with a reasonable amount of depth for most people. And as always, I highly recommend Sefaria as a great website for helping you with that kind of study. Okay, with our 2-minute buffer now passed, let's go ahead and get started. We are in chapter 21, book of Vayikra, Emor, and we are going to be talking about the Kohanim. Now, we've talked a lot about what the Kohanim do, but we're going to start off in this section with what the Kohanim do not do, or do in the ways that are balanced out by nuts. It's an interesting set of both requirements or requirements to prohibit. The Kohanim are not just about offerings and privileges. The Kohanim also have some rather severe limitations on their own life. And the beginning here in chapter 21 is going to cover that quite extensively. So let's go ahead and work our way through the first section in the text itself from the Torah, and then we'll go back and use our good friends Rashi and Rambam to help us unpack everything that we come across. So, beginning with verse number 1. Adonai said to Moshe, say to the priests, the son of Aharon, say to them, for a dead person among his people, one is not to make oneself tameh. One of the things I love about Fox's translation is that he leaves the word tameh untranslated. That's the word that's usually translated as being ritually impure or ritually unclean. It doesn't have a great English connection, but that's what we're going to work with. So for somebody that is dead, you are not allowed, if you are a Kohen, to allow yourself to become ritually defiled. And as a little bit of background information, coming into contact or even into the same contained space as somebody that is dead will automatically render a person ritually defiled. So this is very much a no contact legislation for the Kohanim, except in verse 2, for his blood relation, one near to him, for his mother or for his father or for his son or for his daughter or for his brother, or for his virgin sister near to him who has never belonged to a man. For her he may make himself tameh. He is not to make himself tameh as a husband among his people does to profane himself. All right, so we're going to stop there because this is the whole section regarding the becoming tameh for a burial or funeral, and we're going to deal with these 4 verses and their repercussions. Now, looking through this superficially, and by that I don't mean Peshat, by that I just mean a person who is reading this for the first time with very little context in the rest of the Torah and very little understanding of Jewish law, just has the English presented in front of them. They're not told any other context. What do you think all of this means? Well, I think most of us would agree that the casual reader with very little understanding of any of this would say, Well, I guess that if you are from the lineage of Aaron, that you are not allowed to become tameh, meaning come into contact with dead people, unless they are your actual like blood relations, since that's what the translation says, even though the word blood doesn't appear in the text, meaning mother, father, son, daughter, or brother, or an unmarried sister, or one that has never been married sister. And apparently for your wife, you would not allow yourself to become ritually impure in order to attend to her burial. Now, again, an initial reader might find that a little harsh. Are we really saying that a Kohen cannot attend the funeral of his wife? Are we really saying that the Kohen could never attend the funeral of anyone else, that they could never participate in helping somebody be buried? Well, this is where the understanding that comes from close reading, careful analysis of this text in comparison with others, and a deeper appreciation for the entirety of Tanakh is going to help us a lot. Because the answer to most of those questions are, it's going to really depend, and there are a lot of options that are going to make it very different than you might think. So let's duck into Rashbam, who doesn't have a lot to say about this particular Torah portion, and we'll see what he wants to add. Now, what he first wants to add here, it's going to sound a little confusing, and I'm going to leave it with a bit of confusion because it's a grammar issue, but the general gist of it, I hope you'll be able to get. A man belonging to the nation of priests. All right, so what are we actually talking about? Sorry, let me roll back up to 1. What are we actually talking about here with this word nation? And where is this word nation appearing? Well, at the end is be'amav. Now, in common translation, that word can mean nation, it can mean people. It's a term that can be used for all of Israel. It's a unusual word in English because it can cover a very wide range of different English translations. In Fox's translation, he has people. In the Rashbam translation, they have nation. The word is that's what we need to hold on to. A man belonging to the nation of priests. Rashbam is interpreting this nation as being the Kohanim, not all of Israel, not even all of the Levites, and not just his relatives, but within the nation of priests. A priest was not to defile himself by contact with a dead human being. That it seems to be the general prohibition, that if you are part of this group, part of the Kohanim, you are not allowed to defile yourself by coming into contact. However, the word be'amav, the final word of our verse, among his people, of his people, is used here in the same sense as in verse 14 later on, where the Torah decrees that the only suitable marriage partner for a high priest, if he was not married at the time of his appointment, is a betula me'amav, excuse me, a virgin from his people. If the Torah had written here le'amav instead of be'amav, the meaning would have been more restrictive, meaning that the way we would understand what be'amav was pointing to would have been more limited. It would have meant instead that the priest must only not defile himself by contact with a Jewish corpse, meaning that it was only with regards to Am Yisrael that this was a prohibition, not with regards in general, not with regards to people of any type. Instead, the Be'amav is saying that as he is among the Kohanim, he is not allowed to defile himself with anyone that is dead. Where if it had been written Le'amav, excuse me, Rashbam is arguing that it would mean he is not allowed to defile himself for the dead of his nation, meaning Israel, which would imply that he was allowed to defile himself among the dead of the non-Jews. That is not the right way to read it because of that little prepositional change at the beginning of the word. Like I said, I'm not going to go into too much of the grammar here. I wanted you to, though, to see the general way that each letter can make a significant difference in interpretation and application. And then Rashbam goes on to give a few more examples of how this works, but we're not going to go into that. A little bit more easily understood is going to be Rashi's explanation of this verse. He is approaching it in a way that is not quite so technical, but is a summary of the classic legal positions on this topic. So we begin over on Rashi on the right-hand side. Say unto the priests, and thou shalt say unto them, our introductory phrase here, but say, and again, thou shalt say unto them. This seems odd, right? This is a repetition. Why is it being said, say, and then say again? Vayomer, and then Emor. Why? This repetition is intended to admonish the adults about their children also, that they should teach them to avoid defilement. So the say and the say is almost reflecting a chain of saying, meaning that Moses is giving instructions to the Kohanim, and the Kohanim are intended to give instructions to the next generation as well, meaning that even children should be instructed in this particular cautioned about this particular behavior. Now, Bnei Aharon, the sons of Aaron, one might think that Halalim, this is a technical term for priests who have lost their priestly status for reasons connected with their birth or marriage. I'm not going to go into all of the permutations on this category, but it is possible for someone to be descended from Aaron, to be a Kohen by origin, by birth, by family tree, but either because of something he has done or because of the marriage that he came from, he might not be considered an actual Ben Kohen, meaning a child of a Kohen that is fit to perform the service at the altar. And that person is thus this other type. If you are that other type, if you are part of the Halalim, then they also may not defile themselves by the dead. Scripture therefore states, say unto the priest, thus only those sons of Aaron's are included who have not lost their priestly character. Consequently, the Halalim are excluded. All right, this is hopefully now becoming a familiar pattern of the way Rashi and indeed Midrash analyze the text. Why would the term come, Bnei Aharon? Why is this being added in? Wouldn't the phrase Kohanim have been completely sufficient? Well, if the phrase had not been included, then we might have thought that these Halalim would also not be allowed to defile themselves for the dead. However, it is only the sons of Aaron that are actually priests that are going to be affected by this particular ruling. And thus, the Halalim are indeed allowed to defile themselves for the needs of the deceased. So again, addition of a word can change how we might have interpreted it. The words are not there by accidents or just as literary flourishes. They are there in order to guide us in our understanding of the full principles. And then again, on this concept of the sons of Aaron, this implies also those of Aaron's sons who have a bodily blemish. We're going to talk about that. Well, maybe today we'll see how far we get. But there are limitations on the Kohanim that have particular types of bodily flaws, what are called a mum, and they are not allowed to officiate at the altar. However, their status is not reduced the same way as the status of the Halalim. So for them, even though they can't go to the altar, they can still be required to obey this particular limit. And then one more explanation of how this Bnei Aharon is going to help us unpack it all. This means the daughters of Aaron, but are not included. It is literally just the banim, the boys. Now, this is something that has to be explicitly said because Hebrew has a very unfamiliar relationship with gender-inflected nouns. In Hebrew, if you have a female plural noun, then you know you are talking exclusively about women. If you have a masculine plural noun, you could be talking exclusively about men, but you could also be talking inclusively about men and women. If we say Bnei Yisrael, we don't mean only men left the land of Egypt. We mean both men and women were there during the Exodus. So the commentaries will sometimes have to point out or argue about whether the ben in the current verse is talking inclusively or exclusively. And here they are saying the limitations about a defilement of a person for the needs of the deceased only applies for the male heirs of Aaron that are that are not unfit to serve at the altar because of being halalim, but it does include those unfit for the altar because of muming, because of blemishes. All of that from one little verse. Again, putting to rest the idea that the Torah can just be read superficially or indeed quickly. And then let's just finish off the broader statement that Rashi wants to make here at the end. There shall be none defiled by the dead among his peoples. Again, this unusual finale. This means as long as the dead is among his peoples, which means so long as there are some of his people, Jews, who can occupy themselves with his burial, thus excluding the case of a mate mitzvah. A mate mitzvah is a corpse of a person whose relatives are unknown or which lies in a place where there are no Jews, nor are there any in the near vicinity. In which case, the priest is allowed to make himself unclean by handling the corpse. So they are, Rashi from the Midrash is reading that be'amav, meaning among his people, in the more expansive, contrary to Rashbam's, that it means while he is among his people, the Kohen cannot defile himself. However, if he is not among his people, meaning if there are no other Jews to attend to the needs of the deceased, then he must defile himself for that person. That be'amav at the end, which hangs there so awkwardly, is in fact teaching the very important principle that if a Kohen is the only person capable of dealing with the needs of the deceased, then the Kohen is obligated to render himself ritually impure in order to take care of this mate mitzvah, this body that is unclaimed and will be not properly buried unless he steps up and does what is needed. Now, again, this is that single word that might feel a bit awkward or is hard to translate, or maybe we're just too quick to translate it, not recognizing that it seems out of place, that is giving us this additional insight. And in this case, it is an insight that is perhaps radically flipping what our speed read would have given us in our first run. That our speed read would have told us, you don't get to defile yourself except for this very exclusive list. But this extra word, understood properly, is telling us not only are there other reasons why the priest may defile himself, there are in fact commanded reasons why he must defile himself. Okay, maybe that's enough for today, trying to reinforce the idea that you got to study this carefully. Don't just try and speed run it. Let's move on to Rashi's understanding of verse 2. So here we have this idea, line everything up because it makes it easier to read back and forth. Here we have this idea of the exceptions that are first provided, which are these close relatives to him. And his kin, those that are near to him. What does this mean? Well, here, this word lish ero is denoting his wife. So I know you're going to think to yourself, but wait a minute. In verse 4, weren't we saying that he wasn't allowed to do this for his wife? That if he was acting as a husband, he can't? Well, no, because again, we have a redundant word here. We have this word meaning his close relation, his kin, and then we also have this idea of the ones that are near to him, hakarov. So that redundancy means that we need to interpret this first one, lish ero, and that's going to be interpreted as his wife, that it's coming to include the woman that he is married to. And thus we're going to have to understand verse 4 and drop our speed run understanding. So let's move on to verse 3. and where it is talking about the needs of the unmarried sister, and for his sister that is a virgin, that is nigh unto him. Nigh is, of course, a strange English word in the modern world. Akrova, meaning near to him, would be a more common 21st century translation. This is intended to include the sister who was only betrothed and has therefore not left her father's house, and who is consequently still near to him. For it continues, who's had no husband. That is to say, who is not yet entered into marital relations with him. So for that sister, meaning a sister that is betrothed, which in Judaism is a much higher level of commitment than the modern Western version of kneeling and handing a ring and just saying, marry me. In Judaism, if you actually are betrothed, you will need to get a divorce if you choose not to continue with the marriage. And that means that that sister of his, even though she is in this elevated status of near married, she is not completely married, and thus he is still allowed, or indeed commanded, as we'll see, to take care of the needs of mourning her, even if that means rendering himself ritually impure. As Rashi points out, this is a command, right? La yitama, for her, he will make himself tameh. This is a command, meaning that he will defile himself, not that he may defile himself. Even though, yes, I know Fox put in a may, because that sounds better in English, it blunts the force of the grammar in the Hebrew, which says for her, he must, or he will make himself ritually impure. So there's a lot to unpack on some of this. But one of the most important things is that for the met mitzvah, the person who died with no one there to take care of him, except for whoever is there, meaning the Kohen, or in this case, the close relatives, or even the sister that was almost completely married and thus would have been moving away from the family's house and not part of the same household anymore. For all of these, you can see that the interpretation is there is more room for him to defile himself in taking care of the needs of the deceased. The rabbis are not saying, oh, he should be strict, don't do anything, just, let other people handle it. It is saying you must take care of these other needs. You must be the one willing to make yourself ritually impure, even though that is normally something that a Kohen would do everything he could not to do. So the obligation of taking care of the needs of those who have passed is paramount in Jewish thought. And we're seeing that played out here, that in the fine and close reading of the text, that the Kohen actually has more obligations than we might have thought in our speed run version. And moving on to verse 4, we'll get Rashi up, and then we'll get Rashbam over here. And now we're going to talk about this issue of the wife. Now, as we already saw, it was interpreted that his wife was the other category, that he would defile himself. But verse 4, kind of in this awkward expression that he will not defile himself in the ways that husbands among his people do, because there's not exactly a parallel verb there, and he will not make himself profane. It's kind of awkward, and that means, of course, it needs interpretation. Rashbam first. So, that he will not defile himself in the way of husbands among his people. No husband among the tribe of priests is to defile himself ritually. So Rashbam takes a straightforward interpretation. It says, consistent to what he's done so far, that Be'amav is talking about the group of Kohanim. It's not talking about the Israelites as a whole, but just the Kohanim group. And the husbands within that group do not defile themselves ritually. Why? Well, as he would thereby desecrate his status as a priest. Now, according to the words of our sages, and we will compare this in Rashi over there, he is not to so defile himself if his dead wife had been someone whom a priest should not have married in the first place, such as a divorcee. However, he is entitled, or indeed obligated, to defile himself for the sake of burying a wife whom he was legally entitled to have married. So verse 4 comes, according to Rashbam, with this very important lehechalo at the end, excuse me, which is trying to focus the non-defiling like a husband in the first half. The non-defiling like a husband is limited only to those situations where he is in the current situation of being married to someone that he's not supposed to be married to, like in this case, a divorcee. In biblical times, a Kohen was not allowed to marry a woman who had already been married before and was now divorced. So rather than saying that the Kohen is not allowed to defile himself for any wife, that last little appendage at the end, the hechalo, is saying that it is only for those that would make him one of the halalim, one of those who have lost their normal status because they have been engaged in a relationship that was not acceptable under the Torah's conditions for who they could marry, which we'll see if we get to more of that topic today. Maybe. Depends how fast we go. I'm not seeing a lot of questions today, so maybe we'll make it. Okay. Rashi, on the other hand, is going to summarize this a little differently. So this means he shall not defile himself for his wife if she is really unfit would be a better English way of saying it, to be his wife, because he is a Kohen, and through whom he consequently becomes profaned as a priest. Remember, that's the Halalim group, so long as she remains with him. The following, therefore, is the literal exposition of the verse, that he will not become, a husband shall not defile himself for his wife's corpse while it is among its people, which means that there are persons who can bury her so that she is not a met mitzvah. And with reference to what kind of wife do I say this? With reference to such a one who lehehalo, that is to say, who leads to his being profaned and therefore disqualified from his priestly duties, so long as she remains with him. So let me put that into English, because I know sometimes the translation doesn't always solve all the problems. So a standard Kohen with a standard wife is obligated to make himself ritually impure in order to take care of all of the needs that go along with her burial. However, a Kohen that is married to a woman from whom, while he is married to her, his status as a Kohen is reduced so that he is one of the Halalim, is not allowed to defile himself for her when she dies, because he wasn't supposed to be married to her in the first place. This interpretation allows us to keep both the early idea that he is obligated to defile for his wife, but also keep verse 4 as having a relevant legal concept that is being added in order that we can understand that situation as well. So no verse goes unexplained, no verse goes unused. All of the words are valuable in unpacking all of the different possible permutations. And again, our speedrun version never would have revealed any of this to us, because we wouldn't have known all of the other requirements about who he was married to, who he wasn't supposed to be married to, all of the other issues with regards to purity and what makes a person ritually impure. All of that's needed to be able to unpack this section. Every piece of Torah is needed to understand every other piece of Torah. Very important principle throughout Jewish understanding. Nothing exists in a vacuum. Okay, let's go ahead and get to our next section. Actually, we'll go ahead and get that up to the top because we've got two verses here that are going to be our next part. We're still seemingly talking about the Kohanim, are not to make a bald spot on their head. The edges of their beard they are not to shave off. In their flesh they are not to incise an incision. Holy are they to be to their God. They are not to profane the name of their God. The fire offerings of Adonai, the food offerings of their God, they bring near, so they are to be holy. Okay, again, speed run version. Apparently, the Kohanim cannot rub a bald spot on their head or do something that makes a bald spot on their head. They're not allowed to shave some part of their beard, and they're not allowed to cut things into their skin. Interesting. And the reasoning given here is that they are holy, and they're holy because they serve at the altar, and they have certain tasks that need to be done, and so they are indeed holy. That means that these special stringencies are understandable upon them. Now, that's our speed run version. We're going to see that our commentary has much more to unpack out of this than just that. So let's begin with Rashba, because as always, he'll give us a short, simple explanation-ish before we launch into the deeper Rashi. So this idea of he will not make a bald spot on his head, both he and an ordinary Israelite are not to make bald spots on their heads as a sign of mourning. So again, we have to look over to chapter 14, verse 1. And just to show you how great Sefaria is for doing this sort of thing, if you click on it, it immediately will open that up. And then you can see you are not children of Israel, which is talking about all of them. You are children to Adonai, your God. You are not to gash yourselves. You are not to put a bald spot between your eyes for a dead person. And then it goes on to have very similar language about the people all being holy. Now, that being said, second, we need to reload our Leviticus text. Why did it take away my Hebrew? Just a second. Oh, and we're going to go ahead and delete Deuteronomy because otherwise it's going to be too tight. So what Rashbam is bringing to us is that because we know in Deuteronomy 14 that this is a prohibition for all of the people, thus we have to read verse 5 as also applying to them. Now, Rashi is going to do the hard work of actually explaining to us why that's the case, rather than just pointing us in that direction. This is more common for Rashi to go into more detail. So let's see how Rashi unpacks this. So they're not allowed to make this boldness. This is not an acceptable form of a mourning practice. But were not the ordinary Israelites also forbidden in respect of this? Why then is this law especially stated with reference to the priests, the Kohanim? But because in the prohibition addressed to the ordinary Israelites, it is stated, you shall not make any baldness between your eyes for the dead, I might think, magic words again, that one is not liable to punishment for making baldness on any other part of the head. Scripture therefore states here, upon their heads. Okay, so short summary up to this point in the analysis. We're learning from the section in Deuteronomy that this applies to everyone, but in that phrase, it's only talking about making a bald spot before your eyes, between your eyes. This talks about the head as a total. Therefore, it's adding a much needed expansion to how we must interpret the law. So far, I hope so good. And now that we have both commands, the law regarding the Israelites may be derived from that addressed to the priests from a similarity of terms used in both prohibitions, what we call a gezerah shava. Gezerah shava is a very powerful hermeneutical tool. It's a very powerful way of analyzing a verse by looking for other verses that use the same structure in the language. And here we have that word karcha, right? This idea of creating the bald spot, this bald spot that's being made. So as that word appears both here and Deuteronomy 14, I lost my reading in the English. Right. So as the term is used here and in the prohibition regarding the Israelites, it is also uses the term korcha, this bald patch. What is the case here? Right. Since it overlaps between the two, what can we derive? The prohibition applies to the whole head. So this verse goes on to tell us about the whole head for Deuteronomy. and Deuteronomy tells us that this verse is talking about all the Israelites and not only the Kohanim. So also, there the whole head is included in the prohibition. And on the other hand, how is the case there? The prohibition is limited to making baldness for the dead. So here too, it applies only to such baldness as is made for the dead. So again, this is how we look at multiple places in the Torah to try and reconcile or derive information from multiple verses in order that each verse will be clearer and will understand more what it's trying to say. Now, there are two other topics in this verse, so let's go ahead and see how that gets applied. Neither shall they raise the corner of their beard. And here we're really looking at raise as in the sense of razor, as will become clear. Because it is written in the prohibition addressed to the ordinary Israelites in Leviticus 19:27, thou shalt not destroy, tashchit, the corners of your beard. I might think, magic phrase, if one took it, meaning the hair off, with any of these other instruments like tweezers or a plane-like file or plane-like or file-like tools that may be used for destroying the hair, he is guilty of violating the law. The word tashchit, to destroy, is a very generic term, which makes it sound like any way of destroying something on the beard would be a violation. However, Scripture therefore states here in our verse 5, they shall not raise off, yigalechu, that this raising, this razoring, I guess would be a better English word, this razoring is specific. The two statements supplementing each other, thus teaching that one is liable only for the use of an instrument, the employment of which is termed as razoring, and which at the same time involves the destruction of the hair. And this results only from the use of a razor. So what is the short summary of all of this? Well, this means that there are ways for Jewish men to not have beards. That if a person uses scissors, if a person uses a type of cream that would remove the hair, if a person uses certain types of electric razors that act like scissors, then it's perfectly fine and kosher for a Jewish person not to have a beard. I happen to like having a beard, but I will trim my beard, and I trim it using a scissor-like device, and that's perfectly fine, and in keeping with this analysis. Again, we take the words of Torah seriously. If it had wanted us to have a beard and never to remove any of the hair of that beard, then the Torah would not have used the term razor here to shave it. It would have just continued to repeat, don't destroy. The usage of this word is informing and narrowing that type of destruction that was discussed back in Leviticus 19. All right, and then finally, in this same verse, we get the concept of incision, of cutting into the skin, of carving or scarring deliberately the skin. This is stated in addition to the law in Leviticus 19:28. So again, this was also discussed in that section, because it is said there for the ordinary Israelites, and you shall not make a cutting in your flesh for the dead. I might think that if one made 5 incisions at the same time, he is liable to the punishment of lashes only once. Again, this is wrong. Scripture therefore states here, lo yishrutu lo yishrutu saratat, right? So that you will not incise an incision. You will not cut a cutting. It doesn't sound right in English, I know. But that's the way the grammar works. Why will it say it that way? To make one liable for each and every incision. For this word, saratet, would be redundant if it added nothing to the previous prohibition. You could have just said, lo yisrutu, that do not incise. But incise incisions means each incision is a separate violation of this mitzvah. And therefore having been added for the purpose of deriving a halacha, since it ought to have been written only lo yisritu, and then I would have known that it refers to making incisions, and consequently the intention of Scripture by using the term "they shall not incise an incision" is to make one liable for punishment for each and every incision. Okay, real world application of this: Judaism does not allow tattooing. Certainly, if you need an incision for medical purposes, for surgery or anything like that, absolutely perfectly fine. But making incisions for the purpose of either mourning or even more mundane purposes for just decorative reasons is prohibited in under Jewish law from this verse and the verse in Leviticus 19. If anybody wants more information about that, I'd be happy to give you, individualized guidance. But this is where the idea that Judaism does not allow tattooing comes from. Okay, and how are we doing on time? Oh, good, we are fine and able to move on to verse 6 just well. So again, this idea of "they will be holy" seems like a follow-up to this whole incision and shaving and baldness thing. Well, what does this mean? It means that even against their will, the court shall force them to remain holy in respect to this. If you are a Kohen, then there is a very special requirement that you must observe. And if you violate or attempt to violate some of these, then the court can prevent you from doing so. So does that mean that there are times when a Kohen might be prevented from attending a funeral? Yes, because they need to remain ritually pure in order to be able to officiate at the altar. And what Rashi is bringing here from the Midrash is that idea that being a Kohen was not just a set of benefits and bonuses for their unique status, but that being a Kohen really had some severe limitations to it. You may not think that this is a severe limitation, the not being able to attend funerals in particular, but for the ancient world, and I would say indeed in the modern world, this is something that would certainly weigh upon many people emotionally, and they would be sacrificing much by not attending in order to be in compliance with this law. Okay, let's go ahead and jump into verse 7, get everybody aligned, and talk about some of those women that the Kohen was or wasn't allowed to get married to. A woman who is okay, now we're going to be using the word zonah here. Now, zonah is another one of those words that I have not come up with a perfect English equivalent. Fox is using the term whore, which is definitely true in many circumstances. But in English, that has a very technical word. It is a professional term. It means somebody who has taken money in the process. Whereas the word zonah does not always mean that. It can, and absolutely does mean in certain circumstances a transactional relationship, but zonah can also mean in other circumstances just promiscuity or licentiousness. So we're going to have to come back to unpack this word, but just take it for the moment as this idea that a zonah does not necessarily mean somebody who has taken money for intimacy. But we then get the next category, a profaned one, the halala, and that is the parallel to the halal for the kohen that is in the relationship. So these two categories, they are not to take in marriage, that a kohen is not allowed to marry them. A woman divorced from her husband, they are not to take in marriage. And also a divorcee is not allowed to be married, for holy is he to his God. And you are to treat him as holy, for the food offerings of your God he brings near, holy shall he be for you, for holy am I, Adonai, the one who hallows you. So let's deal with that, this conversation. I know it's just 2 verses, but let's deal with this conversation. Come on, there we are. This conversation before we move into the next. Well, we'll see where we are with our time. So for verse 7, this halala, this category of profane, what are we actually talking about here? Well, this is a daughter of the category of people of whom the Torah had warned in verse 15 that by marrying them, he would desecrate his seed. Desecrate the seed here is a translation that's quite literal and not the emotionally charged version. To desecrate means to desanctify, to make it less sanctified. So, like I said, the offspring of an improper relationship here would not be allowed to serve as a Kohen. That son of a Kohen and a woman that he was not supposed to marry would not have the status of being a Kohen fit for service at the altar. And that's what Rashbam is pointing out here. Rashi gives us a lot more information. So the Zonah, the first of our titles, is a woman who had sexual intercourse with an Israelite who is forbidden to her as a husband. So, as you can see immediately, the Midrash that Rashi is quoting is not talking about a transactional relationship, but about a woman that he is not allowed to be with. And you'll notice in this particular category, there isn't any statement that she is promiscuous, licentious, acting improperly in any sexual way, other than the choice of partner for each of them. That if she is forbidden to be the husband, then she is classified as a zonah in this circumstance. If she was, for example, a divorced woman, then she would be considered a zonah if they were coming together. So, for instance, with those whom she may not marry under the penalty of excision, karet, or a Gibeonite, or a mamzer, that is, a man born from a union of people who are liable for excision for such a union. So, if that is the relationship then that she has been in, then she is considered to be a zonah. And that would mean that after having had that relationship, she is now no longer eligible for being married to a Kohen. So if that is her background, even if it was consensual, willing, everybody was adult, and nothing else was wrong with the relationship, because she had been intimate with someone that she could not, by law, have as a husband, she now has this status as zonah. Okay, now halala, on the other hand, this is a woman born from a marriage, which is forbidden to the priesthood alone. So this profaned one would be the daughter of a relationship that a Kohen had that he was not supposed to have. For example, the daughter of a widow and a high priest, as we'll see, well, maybe today, the Kohen Gadol cannot marry a widow, or the daughter of a divorced woman, or one released from Levirate marriage by the appropriate ceremony, to an ordinary priest. So if this was the daughter of such a relationship, she is considered a halala, she is considered profaned, again, not emotionally charged, it's just a technical title, and she would not be allowed to marry another Kohen that was looking for a wife. She would, of course, be allowed to marry anyone else. That's perfectly fine. It's only with regards to the Kohanim that there is an issue here. So also it denotes a woman who became profaned in respect to the priesthood, that is to say, who lost the right of marrying a priest, through her having previously entered into a union with one of those priests, a marriage with whom comes under the term marriages forbidden to the priesthood alone. So if a divorced woman enters into a relationship with a Kohen, and then she breaks up with him, well, she would still, so let me try and come up with a better example. We'll go to the widow. So a widow comes into a relationship with the Kohen Gadol, and then that relationship ends. She would now not be eligible for marriage to any of the other Kohanim, even though normally they could marry a widow without any objection. So once she has gone into a relationship that she and the Kohen are not supposed to have, she then becomes unable to be married to any other Kohen afterwards. Okay. And then verse 8 with Rashi, let me get him to the top. So we had this whole idea again, the Kidashto, that you are to sanctify him, which Fox reads as treat him holy, even against his will. It means that if he is not willing to divorce the woman whom he had illegally married, then you flog him. You do the 40 lashes, and you chastise him, which is a different form of corporal punishment, until he divorces her. So this may seem harsh in the modern world, and there's much to be said about how this applies in the modern world, and indeed the conservative movement has a number of more open opinions about who a Kohen can be in a relationship with. But speaking in the rabbinic era, if a Kohen had taken up with a woman that he was not allowed to be married to, then the marriage would still be a marriage, technically, but it is a marriage that must be dissolved during this Second Temple period. And that would mean that he would be punished until he did what was correct, which would be to divorce her and send her away from him. Again, I know this is not something that is of comfort for many people in the modern world. We have fought for the rights, for the freedom to be with whom we wish. Understand that this is very much built around the duties and responsibilities of the Kohanim in the ancient world, and not as operative in the modern. And then let's finish off Rashi's commentary on verse 8. He shall be holy unto you, which means treat him with sanctity as someone that is holy, that he should be the first in all holy matters, such as reading the law, having an aliyah in services, and that he should have the first right to recite the benedictions at a meal, meaning doing Birkat HaMazon, he should be given the first right of refusal. So even though we've just now read all the way up through verse 8, many quite stark restrictions on the Kohanim, recognize that even though he is being charged with maintaining his holiness, and indeed the court can impose that standard upon him, that there are, yes, some benefits that we should also continue to treat him as holy, which means we have to give him certain honors and certain privileges. And in this particular case, those are in the other holy activities, such as having an aliyah or leading the group in Birkat HaMazon, that the Kohen should be given those first dibs. Now, in the contemporary world, in our congregation, we do try to give a Kohen and a Levi for number 2, those aliyot. However, just as we have offered more permission for Kohanim in the conservative movement, we have also diminished their right to demand privileges and honors, which means that if there is a superior reason, such as for a yahrzeit or an ufruf or some other reason that a person needs an aliyah, and the only one that would be available otherwise would be the first aliyah, we are willing to extend that to a non-Kohen under those circumstances. I would say that 90% of the time, the first person getting an aliyah in our congregation is a Kohen, but we do have that flexibility when necessary. All right. Well, the next topic gets very complicated very fast. So even though it's short, we are going to leave it off here. But do continue to study, continue to use the great commentaries of our sages. And if you have questions, as always, please feel free to not only join in during the discussion, but you can always email me afterwards, and I'll be happy to try and provide additional guidance and information that might help. So everyone, excuse me, having a lot of pollen problems today. Everyone have a wonderful day, and I will see you as we study next time.